Welcome, everyone. I'm Wake, your host for Shaman to Shaman. Today, I am honored and delighted to welcome Joan Parisi Wilcox to share her journey and practice with us. Joan is a renowned author, student, explorer, discoverer, teacher, and she studied the Andean sacred arts for nearly 28 years and teaches the tradition to students around the globe. She's the author of Masters of the Living Energy, The Mystical World of the Q'ero of Peru, and 2 other books. She's written dozens of magazine articles, been interviewed for podcasts and radio, and appeared in several documentary films about the Andean mystical tradition and metaphysics in general. Through her blog, kentiwasi.com, she shares the wisdom of the Andes. Joan, it is a delight to spend some time here with you today, and I'm delighted to be here and in your company. And I'd be interested to hear about the early years and how you found the shamanic path.
Great. Well, thank you to Shamans Directory for having me, and thank you to Wake, who is a renowned teacher and author and general light bringer as well. So it's an honor to be here with you. Yes, I've been on this path for just about 28 years, this year, 2023. I had studied a lot of different traditions, but when I came to the Andean tradition, I found a tradition that resonated with me because it was very simple and practical, and it was about being in your life in a sacred way, rather than wanting to step out of your life to do something sacred, to be in ritual or to be in ceremony or to touch the metaphysical or whatever. It's a way of being. From what we call the 4th level, which is kind of more on our level of artistry, we look at it as a path of our conscious personal development, to be able to improve ourselves, to be able to use all of our human capacities, our spiritual capacities, our emotional capacities, our intellectual capacities, our physical capacities, all of us, to be the most glorious human beings that we can be. And for me, it doesn't get any better than that. So I started, really walking this path with Don Juan Núñez Loprado in 1995. He has been an amazing teacher to me, and I honor him publicly here and whenever I get a chance to, and also his son, Ivan Núñez Loprado. And I mean, like anyone on the path, it's been a lot of baby steps. It's been 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It's been a life endeavor, but I can, just speaking in my own personal experience, which is all I can do, it has changed my life. It's helped me to get to know who I am, to love who I am more. I was a person who was very introverted and had low self-esteem and was afraid of everything, afraid of life, really. And it has freed me. It's freedom, the freedom to be who we really are, what we call kanai on the path. So that's what's kept me walking the path all of these years. And in the last 6 or 7 years, it's been my honor to share the tradition with others and to write about it through my blog, kentiwasi.com.
Joan, I'd like to turn back the clock just a little bit. And what I found remarkable about your book was that you were able to interview some of the Q'ero masters who are no longer alive. And I feel that you and Juan Núñez del Prado had the wisdom and the creative availability to be with these shaman who at the time I don't think were widely known. And yet you sat down, you had a lot of questions, and you interviewed several of them, the Q'ero, for your book, and discovered the path question by question, bit by bit, and really experience by experience. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how was that for you to discover the Q'ero in the way that you did?
No. I hadn't been to Peru. I'd only been to Peru like twice really before I got the idea to just go talk to the Pacos. We call them Pacos, practitioners of the Andean sacred arts myself, because the first time I went, I didn't find there what I had been taught, a lot of what I had been taught in the States. And being an ex-academic and a researcher, I decided, well, you always want to go to the primary source. And the primary source was the Pacos. I didn't know a lot of them. I had just met a few of them the year before. I was with Juan in 1995. And then in 1996, that's when I decided to see if I could do this. And I had no idea how I was going to do it. I spoke decent Spanish at the time, but I spoke no Quechua. I had no idea how I was going to, just logistically do it. And the most amazing thing was when I called Juan to ask if he would help facilitate this. The first thing he said to me is, I will do anything in my power to empower you, which was just a beautiful testament to what this path is about. And he facilitated it all. It took all my resources. It was expensive and it was logistically kind of a nightmare because I was working from the States but he was able to hire Ricardo Valderrama, who is just at the top of his field in terms of gathering the oral tradition of the Andean and indigenous peoples. Had a really well-known book. So he got me the best translators, and he arranged with the Q'ero to, come down out of their mountain homes to Urubamba. And, I rented a kind of hacienda motel kind of a place just for us. They closed it down just for us. And I spent a week there with them. But, some funny things happened because the Q'ero don't have calendars and watches. And they actually came down, the group of them that I was going to interview came down out of the mountains a month early, showed up in Cusco a month before their date. I was still in the States. So we had to send them back home and arrange for them to get down at the proper time. But in any case, it was a beautiful week. It was an arduous week because translation is an art. It's not a science. And we had to go through 3 languages, from English to Spanish to Quechua, Quechua to Spanish, back to English. Things get lost in that process. And so there's a lot of follow-up. We don't ask the big abstract questions. They're just lots of little tiny pieces, like pearls on a necklace that we have to then string into a final answer. So I learned a lot about the process. And the Pacos, contrary to what we have seen through certain books, and certainly Carlos Castaneda, where the masters sound like, Harvard philosophers, the indigenous people that I've met, both here in the States and in Peru, they're very quiet. They speak very concretely in, short sentences and right to the point. And it took quite a while to kind of get them comfortable to be able to speak. And in any case, the process was very challenging, but I'm so happy that I did it because, as you say, now years later, all of the male Pacos, the 5 that I interviewed, have all passed on. The most recent from COVID. So we have their words preserved in their own words, of course, through translation. And I'm very grateful for having been able to do that.
I thank you for that summary, Joan, because I think it's important for everyone to understand the timing of your work and the foundation of what you have brought to the world, and that you truly are part of the prophecy, as I understand it, that the Q'ero were meant to share, and that you were available and capable to investigate and to preserve what you learned. So just to finish this segment, could you say a little bit about the prophecy and how you perceive yourself as being a part of this?
Well, I think that's a really big leap to make, to see myself as part of a prophecy. But there's a concept in the Andean of the chakruna, which is the bridge builder. And part of the fourth level is to be able to bridge traditions. And so I feel that I was able to serve that role. I didn't see myself in that role at that time. I was very new to the tradition, and I was nervous as all get out going down there. I'm like, who the heck am I to go do this? I barely know the tradition. I mean, I was literally 2 years into the tradition and learning it. So I felt very ill prepared. So I didn't see myself in that way at all. But it's turned out that way, I guess, and so this is where we just have to do what our passion is and not worry about what it means or what our place in history is or anything like that. It unfolds as it's supposed to unfold if we're just following our heart, our passion. And it, doing that book had had pluses and minuses, because it along with a few other books, it kind of opened up the Andes. A lot of people started flocking to the Andes, and that's had some unfortunate effects because in a certain way, it's commercialized the spiritual tradition. People who are very sensitive to colonialism and appropriation would see it as appropriation. The Q'ero don't see it that way. The Q'ero, the natural law of the Andes is Aini. They say, I ask them all different kinds of ways. Are you comfortable sharing this with outsiders? And they were saying, if you come with an open heart and sincerity, we're obligated to teach it. This is Aini. We give to you and you give to us. So it wasn't about appropriation at all. But it could be seen that way by some people, so that there was a lot of kind of negative kind of energy around it from some quarters. But let me just say, the positive aspect of it is that at that time, 1996, a lot of the young people, they just wanted to get the heck down out of the mountains and go to Cusco or Lima and go to school and learn Spanish and earn money and be part of the modern world. There's a lot of hardships up in the mountains. And like anyone else, they wanted an easier life. But as a consequence of my book and a few other books that came out at that time, a lot of the young people started thinking about, all of these Westerners are coming here, outsiders are coming here. They see us as privileged and rich, which we are in relation to them. There must be something of value here. And so a lot of them started paying attention to their grandfathers and their fathers who wanted to pass this tradition on to them. And they thought it was, just that. That's the old generation. I'm going down and, I want to be part of the modern world. So in a way, it helped revive a respect within the Q'ero community for their own history and their own sacred arts. And I think a lot of them that then came back and started training with their fathers and their grandfathers and others. So it kept it alive in a way that I think it might have been really dying out.
That's exactly what I was going to ask you about, Joan, if you hadn't said it yourself, because I think that's quite a profound realization that there was an availability to discuss the traditions, some of which had been or were being lost if they weren't investigated and preserved in some way. And this increased interest that you speak of, not only by Westerners, but by the indigenous people themselves, and finding out more about their own spiritual traditions while their fathers and grandfathers were still alive. That's what I see as being such an important part of your work, Joan, is enlivening a tradition that very well could have died out when the people of the poncho literally died away.
Yes, and it's just human nature. Juan always told me, don't put the indigenous people on a pedestal. They're just human beings. And that's true. They were taking what was their everyday normal life, and they were just taking it for granted. And by seeing the values others placed on it, they had to reconsider that this isn't just the old way, the old world, I'm going to leave it behind, but maybe there's something of value in my history. Of course, some of them saw it that way, but a lot of them didn't, at least in my experience and my conversations with some of the younger people, through translation, of course. But so yeah, they're just human. They were just taking it for granted. Like we take so much of our freedoms and our liberty and our, individuality and in our culture for granted until we lose it.
The one other thing, Joan, I wanted to point out in taking another look at your book is that what I was struck by was that many of the Q'ero, as you'd ask a question, would discuss the concept you were presenting, and there was not very often a unified approach or a single answer. But each one of the Pacos you visited had seemingly their own points of view or their own series of experiences that informed the tapestry as a whole. And it felt like, from reading the book, that the tradition was almost revitalized or reformed or rewoven in a way to have the Pacos share with one another. Was that your experience?
It wasn't, because so you'll get some of the kind of behind the scenes information now. Okay. So when sometimes I would ask a question like about the chumpis, the energy belts, or about huchamiqui, a way to digest heavy energy. And they didn't know those techniques. They didn't know those practices. It had been lost. So we tried to be very, very careful with that and respectful around that. And sometimes when they had different viewpoints, they would just sit there in a huddle and be just chattering away, totally ignoring us, because in some sense they wanted to present a unified view. And if they had disagreements among themselves, they kind of worked it out before they formally answered. So it was an interesting experience in just, the human communicative dynamics of it. But, in that process, I had to be educated as well, because I would look at Juan and I would say, how can they not know this? How can I know this technique through you and through the last generation of masters who taught you? And these current Pacos don't know it. And this is where he was educating me that, yeah, a lot of the things the last generation of Pacos, they didn't pass it on, or if they passed it on, the current generation just wasn't interested and didn't practice. So things were dying out. And this Chakruna, this bridge builder, I tell my students and others who are interested in the tradition that this is now our sacred responsibility, because we're holding a lot of knowledge that the current Andeans don't even have. So we're preserving it in a way. We're stepping into the lineage, and it really is, the eagle and the condor kind of a thing, where it is for the world now and not just for a certain nation in the Andes Mountains.
Could you say that in a way we're fleshing out the tradition, that as different people, students are exposed to this framework, this spiritual framework, then in a sense we're filling it out, and that even discovering more that's I'm taking a leap here, that's as authentic as what the Q'ero know themselves. Is that saying too much, or could you speak to that concept?
I think you're right on. And I think this is really important for people coming from one tradition to another tradition to understand. This is just a practical matter. But a lot of teachers, I think, don't educate their students about it. And that is that, as Juan has told me so many times, you're not an Andean Paco. And he would say, I'm not an Andean Paco. I'm a, Westernized Spanish heritage professor in Cusco, and you're an Italian American, we have our own gifts. Okay, part of the prophecies is about how each children of God, which are great groups of people, of human society and culture, have their own gifts. And our gift, the Western world, is yachai, is knowledge. We don't think, we don't communicate, we don't practice. Well, we practice, but we think differently. Okay, our lives are so different. We're not weavers and herders and farmers up in the high Andes. We're very savvy, highly educated, philosophical, intellectual people for the most part in our culture. We have a vast knowledge of philosophy and psychology and science and history. That's part of who we are. So if we're going to walk our life as a spiritual path, we don't leave that behind. We have to be true to who we are. They have to be true to who they are. But we can share practices. So we're not trying to be Andean Pacos, and they're not trying to be Westerners, but we can share our gifts with each other. And so that's how we look at it. And when I teach them, I'll just speak for myself, when I teach the tradition, I have to make it useful for the people who are coming to me for teachings, which are basically Westerners, people in first world countries, highly educated, who probably have studied many spiritual traditions and have all kinds of historical and psychological knowledge. We have to make these things useful for our lives. So we stay very true to the cosmovision, to the energy dynamics. We stay very true to the practices, but the application of those things has to be made in a way that's useful for us in our environments and our cultures and our lives. So there's always a translation going on.
I really appreciate your discussion of this search for these fundamental principles within the framework of the Andean sacred arts. And I do want to talk about your passion, and what you agreed to share was more about life as a spiritual path and what that really means. And yet, before we do that,
That's quite all right.
I just have one more burning question, and that is, I love the title of your book, Masters of the Living Energy. And being a student of the Andean arts myself, this idea of the Kausai Pacha was always intriguing to me. And I was trying to translate it into English, or something that I could understand. And I just think your paraphrasing of that, or your working of that, to saying that what the Q'ero are really workers with, or true masters of the concepts and the practices of living energy. Would you be willing to share, how did you come up with the title, with the concept? Okay, tell me about it.
I didn't. Here's the hard reality. If you publish through a conventional publisher, I have yet to see, and I worked as an editor, freelance editor for some small, quote, spiritually based publishers. I have never yet seen a book go to print with the title that the author was writing under the whole time they were writing the book. The marketing team gets hold of it, and they come up with the title. And your title has to have searchable Google terms in it. Okay, so I did not actually come up with that title, but they took that title from phrases that were in the book. Okay, and it is a beautiful title. I agree. I love it, because what the Andean tradition, the basis of it, the absolute foundation of it, is about how we are always in aini, or interchange, with both our material physical universe and a metaphysical energetic universe, that there's these two worlds that interpenetrate each other. We in our culture are not taught how to perceive, move energy, tune energy, okay? And so that's the value of a lot of these more indigenous traditions, where they really do have a foot in both worlds. Even in our religious traditions, we're not really part of the living universe. We have to kind of earn our way there or deserve the love of God or those kinds of things. But they're not, they're connected to the living universe. And so the basis of the Andean sacred arts is that there's this Kausai. And Kausai is analogous to terms in other huge mystical and shamanic traditions, to Ki and Chi and Prana, that there's a life force and that there's some first cause, and everything that's material is a substitution out of the all, but that we have access to this all, whatever God is, at every moment. And so it's about us. That's why I call this a path of consciousness, of development, because it's about remembering who we really are and then learning the things that our culture doesn't teach us, but a lot of indigenous people do, which is to be in reciprocity with the living universe. And I like to say that by the time you finish my 3-month foundation training, you're going to have a PhD in energy dynamics. Because that's the focus, to be able to perceive energy, to then using your own intent and personal power and will and desires and skill and insight to be able to move energy and to be able to tune energy, to make that an integral part of your life, the life of this world of flesh and blood and bone and matter.
What did you want to call the book, Joan?
I don't remember. I don't remember what the original title is. It's probably in my first draft folder in my computer. But yeah, I don't. But, I've had 3 books published by conventional publishers, and I think only one made it through with the title that I had suggested. So
I love that concept. Should we attribute it to you every time we use the idea of this is living energy? What we're doing is being able to understand that this is a world with permeating vibrations, and to that we aren't victims, but we're co-creators and participants.
You can't attribute that to me, because that's the word that the indigenous people use, Kausai. It goes back to the root Quechua word ka. Ka means to be. Kani means I am. Tanai means who I am becoming, the unfolding of me as I continue. Kausai then comes from that root of ka, to be, and it means life. To be here alive and conscious in the physical world. So that's the word. I just translated it to, Juan uses that phrase and I use that phrase because it's really a direct translation of the root of the word Kausai.
Well, you are an academic, Joan. You can back up whatever you say. So that's very helpful, I think, to understand the root of the term. And I believe the living energy is an accessible description. Have you found that useful as an explanation of what this is all about?
Yes, absolutely. Because it is what we are. We know we're alive, and there's something that gave us life beyond the physical egg and sperm. That is a physical integration. But something in that physical integration sparked consciousness. I think it's more than just an evolutionary, physical mechanism. And to not take that into account, into who we are, is to lose the sense of what we mostly are, which is conscious human beings. So if we see that, we can then begin to live as that and get beyond our material realism science to seeing our lives as not just a physical unfolding, but as an energetic and even spiritual unfolding as well.
I would be remiss, Joan, if I didn't ask you to tell us about yourself in terms of what are the core healings or teachings that you offer for someone who may be interested in pursuing the Andean shamanic arts. Why might they choose you?
Well, I have been on the path for quite a long time. And as you say, I'm a little nerdy. I'm kind of an ex-academic. I try to preserve this tradition in not a scholarly way, but as an accurate a way as I can, true to the way I was taught it. And of course, it gets filtered from the old masters, Don Benito Corey-Waman, Don Andreas Espinosa, Don Melchor Deza, are our three masters through the lineages I teach, and through Juan Nunes del Prado, and then through me. And so I hold this path with the utmost preciousness. I think it's changed my life, and I know it can change others' lives. It's just one path. I'm not saying it's better than other paths. So for instance, if you study with me, you're going to understand what the vocabulary means, not because I'm explicating vocabulary for you, but because it's absolutely crucial for you to understand the energy dynamics. If you study with me, you're going to be learning from the fourth level, which is not a formulaic or rote level. It's the level of artistry. Juan Nunes del Prado calls this path the Andean sacred arts. An artist is someone who is free and individual and is a creator in their own right. And so we have to take these core energy dynamics and part of the cosmovision and be artists with it. How can I use it in my life? Because my life's totally different than your life. Okay, how can I use it in my culture, in my family? So we're artists. So it's about personal responsibility. And I'm not going to sit there and tell you, this is how you do a despacho, which is a nature offering. This is what you must have in your Misha. No, it's completely different than that. It's what is your Inca seed? Why are you you? And how are you going to express who you are as a living energy through these practices? So it's a fourth level approach, which is a much more abstract approach. So I teach that through the 3-month foundation training. I'm not the type of person, and I don't think a fourth level teacher ever wants to keep students. I want you to be master. I want you to be a master. So you're going to study with me for 3 months, and you're going to have just about everything I know. Okay, I give you free audio recordings so you can go over it and over it and over it again. But there are some additional trainings. There's what we call the master class, which is about the training. We say in the tradition, working with the nature spirits, like the Apus, the mountain spirits, the Nustas, the caves and the water and so forth. The nature spirits can take you to the 3rd level of human development. The training can take you to the 4th level of human development. And after that, you have to work with the universal spirit beings, what we call the Texi Apakuna. And that's what we teach in the master class, how to be a universal Paco. And then after that, because I think it's so helpful, like you just, I think found it interesting when I talked about the Quechua root of the word kausai. It helps you see what it means. So I have what I call my deep dive classes. One of those deep dive classes is called Quechua Concepts and Vocabulary. And we take a deep dive into the meaning and the substance behind the major terms that we use. And then there's a deep dive class in the Jaiwarisca, which is the despacho. I don't have time to go into that in detail in the training, so I offer a deep dive class in that. It's just a 1-day, like 2-hour class. There's a whole protocol for developing human interpersonal relationships that the Andeans have the framework for, and Don Juan and Don Ivan have really fleshed out in the most beautiful way. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about it deeply. So there's a class called Holy Relationships, which is about how to bring the highest level of energy to your interpersonal relationships. There's a concept in Quechua called Wilca, which is the black light energy, said to be one of the highest. It's not the highest tuning of energy, but it's the second highest tuning of energy. I'm just for this year offering for the first time a deep dive into what Wilca is. So there's 5 of these deep dive classes. And then just one final thing I have found in my own life, and I have worked with others who have found this as well, that to live our lives as our spiritual path, to develop and to be the most glorious, whole, light-filled beings that we can be, we have to really attend to our human emotions and psychology, because those are the places that cause us to create the most heaviness in our lives. So I have developed a year-long class. It's four classes once every 2 months. 3-hour classes with Christina Allen called The Inner Tewantin, which is a deep dive into your shadow, into your persona, all the ways we make hucha. The Andean tradition will tell you how to transform the hucha that you realize you have, but it doesn't really tell you explicitly how to stop creating it in the first place. So Christina and I said, we ought to do a class on let's not create it in the first place. Then we won't have to do so much cleaning. So we offer this Inner Tewantin class, but you have to have gone through the foundation training for any of these other classes. So, and that's probably as much as I'll offer, because I don't want to keep people perpetual students. Ultimately, you have to stop learning and just practice. You've got to live it and practice it. And so it's like a mother bird kicking the fledglings out of the nest. Fly on your own. Students ask me, what's next? What's next? I say, your life. Just
well, there's a segue to life as a spiritual path. But before we get there, once again, I just want to say, Joan, if you were to say, what is your most appropriate kind of student? Who do you find most benefits from the beginning classes that you offer? What is a typical student like?
Yeah. I have found that this tradition just appeals to so many people and so many different stages of their development and aspects of their life that I couldn't really kind of put a container around it. But I will say that for those who study with me, they're ready for the 4th level. They're a little bit more comfortable with uncertainty without me telling them this is how you have to do it. This is how it's always been done. They're more comfortable looking inside themselves and say, oh, this is how I will express myself. This is how I can use this practice in my life, in my situation. So they're ready to take personal responsibility. They're open. The 4th level is open. We're curious. Those are some of the capacities I would say would best serve people coming to me as a teacher, to just be open and curious and be ready to take responsibility for yourself, and to be ready to not have me tell you how to do things, but once I tell you how the Pacos suggest we do it, and how you can adapt it for our own culture and life, to be able to be an artist, not a technician. Okay, but an artist.
Well, it sounds, Joan, from that description that it may not be best for the person just beginning on a personal growth path. Would you say that's true? Does someone need to be in consciousness?
I actually, it can be more difficult for people that have studied other traditions or that have studied the Andean path with other teachers, because suddenly they're juggling all these frameworks, and there's going to be contradictions. At the 3rd level, we say, I have the truth, or this is the best. And that's a trap. because we can take something, there's human truths from all of these beautiful spiritual traditions, and we can fill our tool bag with many different tools. And so I never say, like Juan always said to me, and now I parrot Juan and say to students, don't believe a word I say. I'm going to teach you the practices. Practice them and see how if your life improves. See how it affects your life. But this isn't a dogma. Don't believe me.
So your teachings are amenable to people who are just beginning their awakening to their lives as a spiritual path.
Yes, and it can be, it can be like the blank slate. And what matters most is that, if we're living I'm going to segue to life as a spiritual path because it's applicable here. So I say that, students ask me, is the Andean tradition for me? I'm looking for a spiritual path. And I've come to see that there's only one spiritual path, our life. Our life is our spiritual path, okay? But people come to people are looking for frameworks in order to understand their life as a spiritual path, looking for tools, to be trained with tools and techniques and to gain insight into their life as a spiritual path. And so we can choose different frameworks. And the framework may be Buddhist or Celtic or Andean, okay? So the Andean framework is not the framework for everybody. And sometimes you just have to start the training before you discover that it's not for you, or it's not for you right now. I've picked up books by different quote unquote spiritual authors and just didn't resonate with me, put them down. I didn't like them, or I was judgmental about them, or I didn't understand them. And then 5 years later, 10 years later, I picked up the same book and it was like, aha. That wasn't because anything in the book changed. That was because I changed. So it can be the absolutely perfect path for somebody that's just starting to see their life as a spiritual path. It can be a reset for someone who's been wandering all over the place and studying lots of different traditions and wants something really simple and practical. There's no way to know. It's the knowing is in the doing and in the living of it. That's why you have to be curious and a little bit patient.
How large are your classes, Joan, and what kind of form are they in?
They're really small. I'm not a person for big trainings. And part of that's practical because we have to do some karpas. And there's certain karpas I have to do individual by individual. And so I try to keep my trainings to 25 people. 30 is a huge class, whether I'm teaching live or whether I'm teaching online. And I mostly just teach online now, not as a result of COVID, although it's been very handy that I've done that because of COVID, but just because I got exhausted traveling. And people say, oh, well, I want to learn live. And I'm like, well, what's not live about us right now? Except, you're seeing me through cyberspace rather than sitting in the flesh before you, but everything's the same. But I keep the classes small because there's certain things we have to do person by person, and it takes time. And if I have more than 30 people, it just would take forever in a class. I'd bore the heck out of the other people waiting while I was doing it with one person, that kind of thing. But I also think this is a personal path. It's so personal. And so I like to keep the classes personal, time for questions, discussions. I'm always feeling time pressure because I try to teach everything I know. And so I understand I can be overwhelming as a teacher sometimes. But, I try to keep it inexpensive and I try to keep it at a short amount of time. So it's once a week for 3 months, but I want to give you just as much as I know in that amount of time. So yeah, I try to keep it inexpensive so it's available to all, small so it's personal, and very substantive so that when you have the recordings, you can be listening to that teaching those 3 months for the rest of your life and still getting stuff from it.
Sounds like a good value.
Yeah, I try
well,
to,
as you say, that people can come back to it at a later time and learn something new.
You have to. I sat through Juan's trainings over and over. I took copious notes. He allowed me to record. I listened to those recordings over and over, transcribed a lot of them. Every time I came back, because I had changed, I could hear something in a new way. I could understand something in a deeper way. I could correct something I misheard and was doing wrong. Or Juan could correct something or elaborate on something he didn't elaborate in one training. And sometimes it was a complete elaboration that opened up a world of insight for me. So Juan always suggests that our training is a protocol. Our protocol is a set sequence of training. We learn in a very precise order. And in order to really master everything, in the classes, I want to give you an experience of each of the energy practices and understanding the energy dynamics, but you're not going to master them in us doing a 10-minute energy exercise or a 20-minute energy exercise. So you can come back and really dive in through the audio file. It's not a video, it's just audio. But Juan says if we really want to master it, we need to go through the whole protocol at least once a year. And I can say I do it all the time because I'm teaching it. But when I wasn't teaching, I would revisit it because I had those notes and I had my own personal recordings. So I just make it easy for people now and give them the recordings. I just want to say that for some of my students I was teaching back in 2015 and 2016, the course is greatly expanded now. I've learned more. Some of the things I was saying in 2015 and 16 are a little bit different nowadays, So I'm always learning too. I mean, I'm a student as well as a teacher of the tradition.
You're still learning, Joan?
Oh my gosh, all the time. During COVID, I had a lot of time on Zoom with Don Juan and Don Yvonne and Christina Allen, and the four of us would meet. And I will tell you, I think I learned more of the nuances and deep dive of this tradition in the 2 years we were in isolation in COVID online with Juan than I've learned in the last 28 years. And it's totally enriched the way I teach now.
And what about individual sessions? If someone wanted to meet with you and just see, is there a fit with you or in classes themselves, or a personal session related to a particular issue? Do you offer that kind of thing?
Yeah, I do some coaching. I do much less of it now than I used to just because of time constraints. I'm so busy. But I'll do personal coaching with people. I'm an intuitive medium, so I do readings for people. But if students just want to have a session to discuss something personal for them in the training, we can have a one-on-one Zoom. I try to keep those really inexpensive as well. So yeah, and I'm always available. I spend tons of time answering emails from my students in great detail. I try to be as accessible as possible for those who are studying with me in many different ways, whether it's a telephone call or an email answer to a question or a one-on-one session.
And finally, Joan, in terms of life as a spiritual path, I know you've mentioned this term again, but I think it's important enough to dive in a little bit, if you'd be willing. Kanai. I've never really been that exposed to that particular term. And how is that important in the spiritual path?
Kanai is, we have mystical eyes. We have mystical centers in our physical body. There are 7 of them. And each of the eyes, well, the 3 upper eyes, which are the 2 physical eyes and the center in the middle of the forehead, they're like a unit. So we have these 5 major centers, and each eye is about us fine-tuning our perception of the metaphysical world, of energy perception, of inspiration, imagination, those kinds of things, but of our humanness, okay? So they're called nyawis, which just means eye in Quechua, but they're like full perceptual organs. And so each of the eyes has a capacity that we can learn to develop at that frequency of energy. And Kanai is one of those capacities. That's really the integration of our Inca seed, which is our drop of God, who we really are, this stream of consciousness that came down into the physical egg and became a human being, the zygote, and grew into a human being. And our Sonko. The Sonko is an energy center that's in the middle of the chest. The Sonko is translated as heart, but the Sonko as an energy center is not about the heart, not about the organ of the heart. It's about the center of our feelings, okay? And not necessarily our emotions. Emotions are different than feelings, but I'm not going to get into those nuances. But the center of our there's no hucha, there's no heaviness, only Sami in our Inca seed and our Sonko. All our other Nyawis can have heaviness, but not our Sonko. So when these two Sami-filled places that are the core of our beingness are integrated, the capacity that's unleashed in us is called Kanai, which means to be who you really are, the unfolding of your growing into who you really are. Wake is not Joan and Joan is not Wake. We're different. We have different Inca seeds. We have different being. The expression of our being is unique. This is the only time as a writer I use the word unique, because there's very few things in the world that are unique, but we human beings are truly unique in our essence, in our Inca seed. So Kanai is knowing who you really are. And so that's why I say we can choose a framework to live our lives, but life as a spiritual path is the unfolding of your Kanai. And your life as a spiritual path is going to be, there's going to be a lot of overlap with mine as a spiritual path, but there's going to be differences as well, because you have a different beingness, a different history, a different, there's just differences. So it's inherently personal. This is what we talk about, like Christians talk about when they say have a personal relationship with God. Your Inca seed, your Sonko, your Kanai is like your personal relationship with whatever creator is, but we have to be able to know who we really are before we can live as who we really are. And so the work of choosing a spiritual framework is to help us know who we really are. And there's different ways of doing that. The Andean tradition isn't anything special. It's just one way of knowing that. So our work is to know who we really are. To know who we really are, we have to do our work. We have to get through all of our heaviness and see our lightness. We have to, I could go on and on. I won't get into the details of that, but we have to know who we really are. And so that's why we're artists, because we can use the same tools. Every artist can use oils or colored chalk or acrylics or whatever. We have the same tools. Those are like different spiritual frameworks, Buddhism or Native North American tradition or Andean tradition. But we're all artists. We have the freedom to express what's in us and bring it out, just like an artist. We're creators. So Kanai is knowing what it is you have to give to the world, who you really are, and being able then to have the personal power to live as that.
I thank you so much, Joan, for helping me understand life as a spiritual path more, and the foundation that has really grabbed your heart and your mind and the way you walk in the world. It grabbed you full force, and you offer it so freely and with such depth of knowledge and awareness. You had been an author to me before meeting you, and I met you on the Shamans Directory or through that platform itself. And I know that you are an ambassador of the Shamans Directory, and that you have quite a bit of involvement in the ongoing programs and growth of the Shamans Directory. So I wonder if you could end with telling us a little bit about your association with the Shamans Directory, and what do you feel the importance of this platform is, and the belief that there is one fire and one medicine. What do you have to say about that, Joe?
Yes. Well, when I was first contacted by Trish Bennett and Naomi Beckers, who are the two leads on this, the creators, and they have a whole team of amazing people behind them. And they told me their idea. I was just blown away. I was just ecstatic that there was someone that was going to try to create from scratch an international platform for people who see their lives as a spiritual path, and for people who are seeking out teachers and healers and so forth, to have a very simple, easy online platform to see who's in their area, who's teaching online. It's just, it's a cornucopia of information. And it was an enormous undertaking. Anyone who's ever tried to create a platform from scratch knows what enormous passion and vision Trisha and Naomi needed to have to do that. So as soon as I heard that, I, of course, went back to Juan telling me, I'll do anything in my power to empower you. And that's what I like to do when I see people come to me and ask me to do things. But they have created a beautiful, elegant, simple platform for us to come together as a community. Because at the fourth level of the Andean energy dynamics, we get beyond seeing ourselves as Canadians or Americans or, British or South African or Thai. We just see ourselves as human beings. That's the one fire, the one medicine. And at heart, whether you're studying Buddhism or, like I say, any other the Andean path, you'll come to the truths, the foundational truths that are common to all spiritual paths. That's the one medicine, one fire. So they have just drilled down to the core dynamic that joins us all as human beings and spiritual beings. I'm so enthusiastic about people finding the site, growing the site, signing up to be on it, looking for guides and teachers and healers on it. And also people like you who are facilitating access to people like me, and to get the word out and to let people know this has changed my life, and there's things available for you to change your life, And so Trish and Naomi and their team have been just the most in deep integrity about being stewards of this creation and bringing this energy to the world at a time when the world is struggling to go from the third level, which is a level of separation and discrimination and competition, up to the apex of the pyramid, which is the fourth level, which is a place of cooperation and similarities and connection and community and cooperation. And that's the spirit I've seen as they build this platform, and people like you that are helping them, fire it up with all kinds of amazing content. And it's just, my honor to be part of it.
Thank you so much, Joan, for your work. Certainly the Shamans Directory has been a way to find one another. And really, I believe, especially from your inspirations, to find ourselves even more deeply. On behalf of the Shamans Directory then, Joan, I want to thank you so much for being with us today and participating in the sharing of your wisdom, and telling us a little bit about your path and what you offer to the world, and being such a great contributor to the development of the medicine that is within us, and in particular, the format and the foundation of the Andean spiritual path. And living our lives as a spirit path is a very inspirational message, and I appreciate that. Thank you, Joan.
Thank you.
For those of you who are watching, thank you for joining another session of Shaman to Shaman. We hope you've been inspired, as I have. If you'd like to schedule a session or take a class from Joan Wilcox, or learn more about the other amazing healers and teachers of the directory, please visit us at shamansdirectory.com. Until next time, this is Wake. Thank you for watching and for living your sacred life and for walking your sacred pathways.